The Hounds of God. The good werewolves. When you think werewolf, what comes to mind? A monstrous beast, right? A human cursed to transform into a ravenous, bloodthirsty predator under the full moon. For centuries, that's been the story. In European folklore, the werewolf is a creature of pure nightmare, a symbol of our most savage impulses, a monster that often had a pact with the devil himself. During the 16th and 17th centuries, a full-blown werewolf panic swept across parts of Europe. Being accused of lycanthropy wasn't just gossip. It could get you tortured and burned at the stake. The werewolf was, without a doubt, an agent of evil. But what if that entire understanding was wrong? What if, buried beneath all the horror, there was another, completely different story? A story not of damnation, but of divinity. A story where the werewolf wasn't a monster, but a holy warrior fighting a secret war for the soul of humanity. Sound of a gavel. Picture this. It is 1692. We re in a courtroom in a region called Livonia, then part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, in what is now Latvia. An 80-year-old man named Thiess of Kaltenbrun is on trial. The charge? He's a werewolf. In an age of witch hunts and paranoia, this was basically a death sentence. But instead of denying it, instead of begging for his life, Thiess does something that leaves the entire court speechless. He confesses. He tells them, yes, he's a werewolf, but he's a Hound of God. This is the incredible, true story of the werewolf who claimed he was a saint. Section 1. The Confession of Old Thiess. The courthouse in Ginzburg in 1692 was a place of stern, rigid authority. The judges were men of law and faith, and they had a very black and white view of the world. God was in heaven, the devil was in hell, and werewolves worked for the devil. They'd heard it all before, and were probably expecting a simple case. Maybe this old man, old Thiess, was just senile. Or maybe, like so many others accused of witchcraft, he'd confessed to some diabolical pact after a little persuasion. But Thiess wasn't your typical defendant. He was an 80-year-old peasant, a well-known, if eccentric, folk healer. And he wasn't denying a thing. In fact, this wasn't even the first time he'd brought it up. The court records show that over 10 years earlier, he'd accused another man of breaking his nose during a fight. A fight that Thiess claimed took place in hell. The court at that time basically patted him on the head and sent him home. But now, the rumors had resurfaced, and the judges wanted to get to the bottom of it. They asked him point blank, "Are you a werewolf?" His answer wasn't a scream or a denial. It was a proud, matter-of-fact admission. Yes, he was a werewolf. But what he said next shattered every idea they had about demonology. He wasn't a servant of Satan. He and his kind were the devil's mortal enemies. They were, he declared, the Hounds of God. Oh, we can just imagine the stunned silence in the courtroom. The judge's entire framework of good and evil had just been thrown into a blender. A werewolf claiming to be on Team Angel wasn't just heresy. It was nonsensical. It was a paradox the 17th century was totally unprepared for. They pressed him for details, absolutely certain his story would fall apart and reveal the devil-worshipping truth. But Thiess didn't waver. For him, this wasn't some fantasy. It was his life's work, a sacred duty he was finally revealing to a world that had forgotten its true protectors. The judges leaned in, and old Thiess began to tell them everything. To really get how mind-blowing this confession was, we need to understand the monster he was supposed to be. Contextual Interlude 1. The age of werewolf hysteria. The Europe of Thiess' day was terrified. This was an era of religious wars, plagues, and deep social anxiety. The witch trials were in full swing, fueled by books like the infamous Malleus Maleficarum, or The Hammer of Witches, which was basically a guidebook for prosecuting and executing people for witchcraft. It solidified the belief that the devil was a very real, very active force in the world. And tied up in all that fear of witches was the terror of the werewolf. The werewolf of this period was no longer just a man with a curse. He was a willing partner in evil. Lycanthropy was seen as a form of demonic magic. Across the German-speaking lands in France, werewolf trials became a horrifying sideshow to the witch hunts. Werewolves were accused of the worst crimes imaginable: serial murder, cannibalism, especially of children, and a total rejection of God. To see just how different Thiess' story was, you only need to look at the most infamous werewolf case in history, the trial of Peter Stumpp, the Werewolf of Bedburg. About a century before Thiess, in 1589, the German farmer Peter Stumpp was accused of a 25-year reign of terror. Under brutal torture, he confessed to an absolutely sickening list of crimes. He claimed the devil gave him a magic belt that let him turn into a wolf, and in that form, he murdered 16 people. He even confessed to killing his own son and eating his brains. Stumpp's confession, whether true or just the result of unimaginable pain, was the perfect image of the demonic werewolf. He was a moral black hole. His execution was one of the most gruesome ever recorded. He was tortured with hot pincers. His limbs were broken on a wheel. He was decapitated, and then his body was burned. This was the werewolf. This was the monster the judges in Livonia expected to find in old Thiess. The werewolf was a devil worshipper and a cannibal. The punishment was fire. There was no gray area. So you can imagine their shock when this 80-year-old man stood up and said, "You've got it all wrong. We're the good guys." Section 2. The story of the Hounds of God. Back in the courtroom, the baffled judges demanded an explanation. If he was a werewolf, where were the bodies? Thiess' story had none of that. His transformation wasn't a curse. It was a calling. He explained that he and the other Hounds of God transformed 3 times a year on specific holy nights: Pentecost, Midsummer's Eve, and most importantly, St. Lucia's night in the dead of winter. On these nights, they didn't go hunting for villagers. They went to hell. Now, the hell Thiess described wasn't the fiery pit of Christian sermons. He described it as a real physical place, a swamp, beyond the sea. This was their battlefield. Their enemies, Thiess explained, were the devil and his army of sorcerers and witches. And what were they fighting over? The harvest. According to Thiess, every year the witches would steal the blessing of the earth, the sprouts of grain, and the fertility of the livestock. They'd hoard these stolen blessings in hell, hoping to cause famine and misery on earth. The werewolves' job was to get it back. Armed with iron rods, they would descend into hell and wage war on the witches. He described chasing them like dogs, beating them with their iron weapons until they gave up the stolen goods. The iron rods are a key detail. In folklore across Europe, iron was one of the few things that could harm supernatural evil. The judges were stumped. If the hounds brought back the stolen blessings, how did that work? Thiess explained that they weren't bringing back physical grain, but its essence, its fertility. Their secret war was the reason the fields were fertile and the herds were healthy. They were the unseen guardians of humanity's prosperity. When the court asked him what happens to a werewolf's soul when he dies, Thiess' answer was a direct contradiction of everything they believed. A witch's soul, he said, is dragged to hell. But when a Hound of God dies, his soul goes straight to heaven, welcomed as a faithful soldier of God. He even explained how he became one. It wasn't a pact or a bite. He said a rascal once drank a toast to him, breathed into the jug, and said, "You will become like me." By taking the drink, Thiess accepted the duty. It was an initiation, a passing of the torch. He was now looking for someone to take his place, but complained he couldn't find anyone willing. This was his testimony. It was detailed, consistent, and turned the entire werewolf myth completely on its head. He wasn't a monster. He was a protector. To the court, it sounded like madness. But was it? Or was Thiess the last voice of a tradition so ancient that almost everyone else had forgotten it. Contextual Interlude 2: The Benandanti and Pagan Survivals. For a long time, the trial of old Thiess was seen as just a weird historical oddity, a one-off case. How could one old man in a remote corner of Europe invent such a heroic and complex mythology for himself? The key to this puzzle was found in the 1960s by an Italian historian named Carlo Ginzburg. While digging through Inquisition records in Friuli, Italy, Ginzburg found a series of trials from the 16th and 17th centuries about a group of people called the Benandanti, which means the good walkers, and their story was shockingly similar to Thiess. The Benandanti were peasants who claimed their spirits left their bodies several times a year to fight a secret war against evil witches. They said they were born for this role, marked at birth by being born with a caul, a piece of the amniotic sac over their head. While their bodies lay in a trance, their spirits would travel to a great valley to battle the witches for the fertility of the fields. And get this, the Benandanti fought with stalks of fennel, while the witches fought back with stalks of sorghum or other similar plants. If the Benandanti won, the harvest would be plentiful. If the witches won, famine would follow. The parallels are undeniable. Both the Hounds of God and the Benandanti were protectors of their communities. Both fought witches on specific nights of the year for the harvest. Both saw themselves as soldiers for Christ. And in both cases, the authorities, the judges, and the inquisitors were completely baffled. They tried to twist the stories into confessions of diabolical witchcraft, but it just didn't fit. Ginzburg came up with a groundbreaking theory. He argued that the Benandanti and the Livonian werewolves weren't isolated cases. They were the last remnants of a vast, pre-Christian shamanic tradition that once stretched across Europe. This wasn't about worshipping pagan gods. It was a much older system of folk belief centered on spirit journeys and ritual battles to protect the community. The wolf, a powerful animal in old European cultures, was a natural symbol for a warrior shaman in the Baltic. As Christianity spread, these ancient beliefs didn't just die out. They went underground and syncretized, blending with the new religion. The ancient spirit battle for the harvest became a war fought for Jesus. The evil spirits became the devil's witches. Ginzburg's theory, while hugely influential, is still debated by some historians, but it provides a fascinating lens through which to see these cases. Thiess, then, was probably not just a crazy old man. He may have been a practitioner of an ancient folk religion, one of the last shamans of Europe. His confession wasn't an invention. It was the unveiling of a secret history that the modern world was trying to erase. Mid-roll CTA. This story just completely flips what we think we know about werewolves on its head. If you're enjoying this deep dive into history's hidden corners, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It really helps the channel and lets us know you want more stories like the Hounds of God. Section 3. The Verdict and the Aftermath. Back in Jürgensburg, the judges had a serious problem. Thiess had proudly confessed to being a werewolf. By the book, that was a capital crime. The doctrine was clear. Lycanthropy was devil worship, and the penalty was death. And yet, Thiess hadn't confessed to any of the right crimes. No murder, no cannibalism, no pacts with Satan. In fact, he insisted he was the devil's sworn enemy. In his mind, he was a good Christian doing God's work. How exactly? Do you sentence a man to burn for being a soldier of Christ? The trial records show the judges' total confusion. They grilled him, trying to find a hole in his story. They thought they had him when they pointed out a contradiction about when he had last fought in hell, but Thiess just stubbornly held his ground. They brought in the local pastor to try and convince him his beliefs were delusions from the devil. Thiess wouldn't budge. He knew his truth, and he was sticking to it. Utterly frustrated and probably not sure what else to do, the court finally passed its sentence on October 31st, 1692. Thiess was found guilty, not of being a demonic werewolf, but of heresy and holding pagan beliefs. But the sentence wasn't death. For reasons that aren't entirely clear, maybe it was his age, or maybe the judges were just so bewildered by the whole affair, they showed a surprising amount of restraint. Thiess was sentenced to be flogged and banished for life. He received a number of lashes for his superstitious beliefs and was then cast out. What happened to him after that, we don't know. An 80-year-old man, exiled from his home, likely didn't survive for long. Old Thiess, the last Hound of God, simply vanishes from history. His story, however, survived, locked away in the baffled notes of the court scribes. For nearly 300 years, it was just a historical curiosity. But when you put it next to the story of the Benandanti, it becomes the key to a hidden chapter of European history. It shows us that beneath the official narrative, there are always other stories, other worlds, surviving in the margins. The story of Thiess is about the moment when one of those ancient worlds collided with the modern one and was judged, punished, and finally silenced. Conclusion and lingering question. The story of Thiess of Kaltenbrun forces us to ask some pretty big questions. The werewolf has always been the monster inside us. But Thiess gives us a werewolf as a protector, a holy warrior. His story, along with the Benandanti, suggests that for some people, the lines between man and beast, sacred and profane, weren't so clear. It hints at a world where ancient pre-Christian beliefs didn't just die, they adapted, weaving themselves into the fabric of a Christian Europe. In a way, these Hounds of God were a form of spiritual resistance. They were people of the land, asserting their own power to protect their communities, a power that existed completely outside the official church. But that leaves us with the biggest question of all. Who was Thiess? Was he, as the court decided, a delusional old man? Had his mind created a fantasy to make sense of a long, hard life? Or was he a genius? Did he cook up this unbelievable story of being a good werewolf as a desperate ploy to avoid being executed, knowing a normal confession meant certain death? Or was he telling the truth, as he knew it? Was Thiess of Kaltenbrun one of the last inheritors of an ancient shamanic tradition? A final defiant voice from a world that was fading from memory? A madman? A liar? Or a shaman? We'll probably never know for sure. His story hangs somewhere between history and folklore, a powerful testament to how strange and complex the past really is. What do you think? Let us know your theories in the comments below. Thanks for joining us for one of history's wildest trials. If you enjoyed uncovering the secret of the good werewolves, please make sure you resubscribed and have clicked the bell icon so you don't miss our next exploration. We've got plenty more mysteries to uncover. Until next time.